Hey, everyone. I've been lurking here for a while but never thought I'd be posting myself. I guess I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone out there has advice or at least been through something similar. So my name is Tim. I'm 38 and work as an IT professional, one of those guys glued to screens all day, fixing things before anyone realizes they're broken. My wife Candy is 34, and we've been married for 12 years. She's a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm, always well-dressed, charming, and someone who knows how to work a room. We don't have kids, just a cat named Whiskers, who ironically might be the only honest one in this household. For a while now, Candy's been acting off. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her company's been pushing hard for big campaigns, and late nights at work didn't seem unusual. But it's the little things that started adding up. She began spending more time on her phone, giggling at texts and being secretive when I'd casually ask who she was talking to. When she started dressing up more than usual, tight dresses, makeup done like she was heading to a gala just to grab drinks with the girls, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tipping point for me came about 2 weeks ago. Candy came home late, stumbling in after what she claimed was a wild night with coworkers. She was wearing this blue blouse she knows I love, but there was something on it, smudges, stains, and a faint smell of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I asked her what happened, and she brushed me off saying, "Ugh, Tim, I got bumped into by some drunk idiot at the bar. Why are you so paranoid?" It felt like a slap to the face, but I didn't push it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions and accuse her of something without proof. At the same time, my gut told me something was seriously wrong. That's when I decided I couldn't just sit around anymore. I needed answers. If you've ever been in IT, you know we're no strangers to surveillance and tech tools. I installed a discreet app on her phone to track her location. I know some of you might judge me for that, but I needed to know the truth. I also reached out to a private investigator, a guy named Phil I found through a buddy who'd been through something similar. Phil was no nonsense, and while I hated going down this path, I felt like I didn't have a choice. Last week, I went on a business trip for 3 days. Normally, Candy gets all clingy when I leave, but this time, she seemed eager. She even helped pack my bags like she couldn't wait for me to walk out the door. I kissed her goodbye, but the knot in my stomach made it hard to enjoy the flight. I couldn't stop checking the app. The first night, she stayed home, which gave me a false sense of relief. But the second night, her location pinged at a residential address across town. Phil confirmed it belonged to Jake, her boss. Apparently, he was hosting some party, though I wasn't invited, big shocker. And this is where it gets messy. I got a call from Phil this morning. He said he had photos from that night. He sounded hesitant, which made me panic. "It's bad, Tim," he said. "Really bad. You might want to prepare yourself before you look." So now here I am, sitting in this hotel room with a folder of images in my inbox that I'm too scared to open. I don't know what I'll find, but my gut already knows the truth. I just need to see it to believe it. After staring at the email for what felt like hours, I finally clicked on it. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. The subject line was simple: evidence from 01/03 party. Inside, Phil had attached several photos and a short note explaining what he'd found. The first photo showed Candy standing close to Jake, laughing at something he said. That alone wouldn't mean much, she's outgoing, always laughing, but her hand was on his chest. That wasn't friendly. My stomach dropped, but I kept scrolling. The next photo showed her heading upstairs with Jake, holding a wine glass, her dress slightly askew. Phil explained in the note that this was when the party was still in full swing downstairs, and no one else seemed to be heading in that direction. Then came the kicker, another photo from later that night, showing Candy leaving Jake's bedroom, her hair messy, looking flustered. A second man, one of Jake's friends, was entering the room just as she was leaving. I felt sick. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. But it wasn't over. Phil's note mentioned he'd overheard some of the guests joking about Candy, referring to her as the life of the party. One of them said something like, "Jake's one lucky guy. I wish I'd gotten my turn." My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was being openly mocked by these people. I didn't know what to do. I sat there in that cheap hotel chair, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Candy wasn't just cheating, she was humiliating me, herself, and everything I thought we'd built together. How do you process that? How do you even begin to confront someone who has thrown every ounce of trust and respect out the window? I called Phil, needing to hear a voice instead of the chaos in my head. "Phil," I croaked. My throat was dry. "Thanks for sending this, but what do I do now?" "Tim," he said carefully, "I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you this much. Don't confront her until you're ready. Get your ducks in a row, your finances, your documents, everything. You need to be in a position of strength." He was right. If I blew up now, I'd just give Candy the chance to twist things, manipulate the narrative, or even play the victim. But keeping calm felt impossible. Every fiber of my being wanted to drive home, throw the photos in her face, and demand answers. Yet, I knew that wouldn't solve anything. By the time I got home from my trip, I had decided on two things. First, I would see a lawyer as soon as possible. Second, I wouldn't let on that I knew anything. Candy met me at the door, her usual smile plastered on her face. "Welcome home, babe," she chirped, pulling me into a hug. "How was the trip?" "It was fine," I lied, forcing myself to smile back. "Exhausting, though. I'm just glad to be home." "Ah, poor baby," she cooed, rubbing my arm. "I made lasagna for dinner. Your favorite." Her warmth and affection felt like a knife twisting in my gut. How could she act so normal, so loving, after what she'd done? Did she really think I was that blind, or was she just that good at lying? At dinner, I kept up the act, asking her about work, her friends, and her week. She didn't mention the party at Jake's house. Instead, she claimed she'd spent her Friday night watching Netflix with some coworkers and insisted it was a quiet weekend. The lies just kept coming. I nodded along, pretending to believe her, but every word she said added to the storm building inside me. After dinner, she went upstairs to shower, and I took the opportunity to back up all our financial records onto a flash drive. Bank statements, tax returns, mortgage info, you name it. If I was going to divorce her, I needed to be prepared. Later that night, Candy snuggled up next to me in bed, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't bring myself to touch her, so I pretended to be asleep. But inside, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up here. I had to play my cards right. This wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about protecting myself and my future. But how do you sleep next to someone when you know the truth about who they really are? The next morning, I woke up early, though I hadn't slept much. Candy was still in bed, looking peaceful, like she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't stand the sight of her, so I grabbed my laptop and went downstairs. I spent the better part of the morning researching divorce attorneys and reading horror stories about how infidelity can wreck not just marriages, but also financial stability. By the time Candy came downstairs, I'd already made up my mind. I was going to meet with a lawyer that week. "Morning, babe," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You're up early. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just catching up on some work," I lied, closing my laptop. "Got a lot on my plate this week." She kissed me on the cheek, completely oblivious. "Well, don't overwork yourself. You're no good to me if you burn out." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. Instead, I gave her a tight smile and changed the subject. "What's your schedule like this week?" "Oh, just the usual," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Meetings, brainstorming sessions, and Jake wants me to pitch a new campaign idea by Friday." Jake. The name alone made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. Sounds busy. That afternoon, I called the lawyer Phil had recommended. Her name was Sarah, and she sounded sharp, no nonsense. Exactly what I needed. We scheduled a consultation for the following day, and she gave me a list of documents to bring. Luckily, I'd already gathered most of them. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I wasn't the kind of guy who liked confrontation or drama. I was a problem solver, a fixer. But this wasn't something I could fix. Candy had broken us, and now I had to pick up the pieces. The rest of the day, I kept up appearances. Candy went out in the afternoon, claiming she had to meet a friend for lunch. I knew better than to believe her, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I used the time to dig deeper. I checked our shared credit card account and found charges for a hotel room last month, one that she never mentioned. There were also receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. It all pointed to one thing: Candy wasn't just cheating, she was living a double life. That night, I decided to test the waters. Over dinner, I casually brought up Jake. "So what's Jake like?" "I've never really talked to him much." Candy barely looked up from her plate. "He's fine. A little demanding, but that's just how he is. Why? Just curious, I said with a shrug. You spend a lot of time with him. Figured I should know more about the guy. She gave me a strange look, then quickly recovered. He's married, you know. His wife's really sweet. I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Sweet? From what Phil told me, Jake's wife was out of town the night of the party. I wondered if she knew what kind of man she was married to, or what kind of woman Candy really was. The next day, I met with Sarah, the lawyer. She was every bit as sharp as I'd hoped. After I laid out the situation, she didn't mince words. You're in a strong position, she said, flipping through the photos Phil had sent me. The evidence of infidelity is damning. Depending on your state's laws, you could use this to negotiate a favorable settlement. Do you have a prenuptial agreement? I shook my head. No. We got married young, before I started making decent money. She nodded. That complicates things a little, but with proof of infidelity, we can argue for a better division of assets. Do you own your home outright, or is there a mortgage? We're still paying it off, I said. The house is in both our names. Okay, she said, making notes. I'd recommend you start separating your finances. Open a new bank account, move your direct deposits, and limit her access to joint funds. Don't confront her until you're ready to file. Let her think everything is fine. Her advice made sense, but it also made me feel cold, calculating. This wasn't who I wanted to be. But then again, I never thought I'd be in this position. Before I left, she handed me a folder with instructions and reassured me. This isn't just about ending your marriage, it's about protecting yourself. You're doing the right thing, Tim. By the time I got home, Candy was already in bed. I stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, wondering how I'd missed all the red flags. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger, and the life we'd built together was a lie. I knew I couldn't let her keep fooling me, or herself, for much longer. The clock was ticking. The days that followed felt like I was living in some kind of twilight zone. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Candy and I went through our routines, dinners, conversations, even watching TV together like we were still that happy couple everyone thought we were. But beneath it all, I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. One evening, Candy came home unusually late. She had texted earlier saying there was an emergency meeting with her team about an upcoming campaign. I watched the clock as the hours passed. Midnight came and went, and when she finally walked through the door at 1:30 a.m., I was waiting for her on the couch. Late meeting? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She jumped, clearly startled to see me awake. Yes, sorry. It went longer than I expected. We had so much to go over. Her story didn't line up. No marketing meeting lasts until nearly 2 a.m., especially when her outfit looked more like something you'd wear to a club than a boardroom. I nodded, pretending to buy it. Must have been exhausting. You should get some sleep. She hesitated, watching me like she was trying to gauge my mood, then headed upstairs. I sat there for a while, my anger simmering beneath the surface. She had no idea I knew everything. The next day, I followed Sarah's advice and started separating my finances. I opened a new bank account, transferred most of my savings, and changed the password on my investment accounts. Candy was never one to dig into the details of our finances, so I figured she wouldn't notice right away. Still, I felt a twinge of guilt. But every time I thought about confronting her, I pictured those photos from the party and reminded myself that I wasn't the one who broke our trust. That weekend, Candy suggested we go out to dinner. We haven't had a date night in ages, she said, giving me her most charming smile. My treat. I almost laughed at the irony. She was playing the role of the devoted wife while sneaking around behind my back. But I agreed, figuring it would give me a chance to observe her. We went to a trendy new restaurant downtown. Candy was all smiles, talking about work, friends, and even dropping a few compliments about me. For anyone watching, we probably looked like the perfect couple. But I couldn't stop analyzing everything she said, looking for cracks in her facade. At one point, I casually brought up Jake again. So, how's Jake doing? Still driving you guys crazy with those last-minute deadlines? Candy froze for a split second, her fork halfway to her mouth. Oh, you know him, she said, recovering quickly. He's always got a new idea he wants us to chase. Keeps things interesting. Must be nice having a boss you get along with so well, I said, my voice carefully neutral. She nodded, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, I guess. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was nervous, probably wondering if I suspected anything. But I didn't push further. Not yet. The next day, I got a call from Phil. He dug up more dirt. "Tim, you're not going to like this," he said. Jake wasn't the only guy Candy was cozy with at that party. My stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "There's talk, pretty solid from what I've heard, that she hooked up with at least 2 other men that night. One of them is a mutual friend of theirs from work." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. It wasn't just one betrayal, it was multiple. And with people she interacted with regularly. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was it about thrill-seeking? Attention? Or did she just not care about our marriage anymore? Phil continued, "I've got more photos and statements from witnesses. Do you want me to send them?" I hesitated. The first batch of photos had been bad enough. But I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. "Yeah. Send them." That night, after Candy went to bed, I opened Phil's email. The new evidence was even worse than I imagined. Pictures of her dancing provocatively with one man, disappearing into a room with another, and laughing with Jake like they were in on some private joke. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a complete disregard for me, our marriage, and the life we'd built. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, a mix of rage and heartbreak coursing through me. How could she do this? How could she betray me with such ease, then come home and act like everything was fine? The next morning, Candy was in a cheery mood, humming to herself as she made coffee. I watched her from across the kitchen, my emotions barely contained. She looked so normal, so carefree, as if she hadn't ripped my world apart. "Big plans for today?" she asked, pouring me a cup of coffee. "Just the usual," I said, keeping my tone even. "What about you?" "Meeting some clients, then probably a late night at the office," she said casually. I nodded, hiding the storm brewing inside me. "Sounds productive." As she kissed me goodbye and walked out the door, I realized something. The woman I thought I loved was gone. And when she came home that night, everything was going to change. Candy came home late again that night. It was almost 10 p.m., and I'd been pacing the living room for hours, rehearsing what I was going to say. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty, but I knew it was time. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The sound of her keys jingling at the door made me freeze. She walked in, looking surprised to see me still awake. "Hey," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "You're up late." "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit." Her smile faltered, and she hesitated for a moment before sitting down. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to sound casual but clearly sensing the tension. I sat across from her, staring into her eyes. "I know." Her brow furrowed. "You know what?" I took a deep breath, pulling my phone from my pocket. "I know about the party at Jake's house. I know about what happened there." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I tapped the screen and pulled up one of Phil's photos, the one of her leaving Jake's bedroom. I handed her the phone. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. "Tim, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Explain how you ended up in Jake's bedroom? Or maybe you'd rather explain why you walked out while another man was walking in." Her jaw dropped, and she looked at me, stunned. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare," I said, my voice rising. "Don't you dare sit here and insult my intelligence. I have photos, Candy. I have witnesses. Do you really think you can talk your way out of this?" She started to cry, but it didn't move me. Not this time. "Tim, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. Sleeping with your boss and his friends isn't a mistake, it's a choice. Several choices." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was drunk and—" "Stop!" I shouted, standing up. "Stop making excuses. You think being drunk erases what you did? Do you even realize how humiliating this is for me? For us?" She didn't answer, just kept crying, her shoulders shaking. I took a step back, trying to control my breathing. I wasn't going to let her tears derail this. After a few minutes, she finally looked up at me, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "What do you want me to say, Tim? I messed up, okay? No, I said coldly. You didn't just mess up. You destroyed our marriage. You betrayed me, Candy. Not just once, not just with Jake, but with God knows how many other men. You didn't just mess up. You threw everything we had away. Her sobs grew louder, but I wasn't finished. You lied to my face. You let me believe everything was fine while you were out there disrespecting me, disrespecting yourself. How long have you been doing this? How many other lies have you told me? She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I laughed again, this time more out of disbelief than anger. You weren't trying to hurt me? Are you serious? You think that makes this any better? The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't have an answer. There was nothing she could say that would undo what she'd done. I'm filing for divorce, I said finally, my voice like steel. I've already seen a lawyer. I've already started separating our finances. This is over, Candy. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. No, Tim, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. There's no fixing this, I said firmly. You didn't just cheat, Candy. You destroyed every ounce of trust one had in you. You didn't even have the decency to come clean. I had to find out from a private investigator. She stood up, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Tim, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head, my heart breaking despite everything. You already lost me, I said quietly. The moment you decided to betray me, you lost me. She sank back onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't stand to be in the same room anymore. I walked upstairs, grabbed a bag I'd packed earlier, and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice desperate. Somewhere I don't have to look at you, I said without turning around. I walked out, slamming the door behind me, and drove off into the night. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but I'd taken the first step, and there was no turning back. I didn't go far that night. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and most importantly, it gave me space to think. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. Candy had already sent a dozen messages, all variations of, please come home, and we can work this out. I didn't respond. Instead, I texted my lawyer, Sarah, letting her know I'd confronted Candy and planned to move forward with the divorce. She called me back almost immediately. Tim, I'm glad you told her, she said, her tone calm but serious. But now the hard part begins. Are you ready for what's coming? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't keep living like this. I need to move on. That's the right mindset, she said. Just remember, Candy might get desperate. She might try to manipulate you, guilt you, or even turn others against you. Stay calm and let me handle the legal side. Her words stayed with me as I lay there in the dark, unable to sleep. Candy's tears had felt real, but I couldn't shake the memory of her lies, the photos, the laughter at my expense. Love or not, there was no coming back from this. The next morning, I woke up to find more texts from Candy. They ranged from apologetic to angry to downright pitiful. I'm so sorry, Tim. Please, we can fix this. You're not perfect either. Don't act like you haven't made mistakes. Are you seriously just going to throw everything away? What about us? I ignored them. Instead, I called Phil to thank him for his work and let him know I wouldn't need further surveillance. Good luck, Tim, he said. I've seen guys go through this before, and it's never easy. Just remember, you're not the bad guy here. Don't let her make you feel like you are. Later that day, I went back to the house. Candy was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept, but I didn't feel sorry for her. This was her mess, not mine. Tim, she started as I walked in, thank you for coming back. I was so scared you wouldn't. I'm only here to get more of my stuff, I said flatly. I'll be staying elsewhere for now. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. Please don't do this, she begged. We can go to counseling, talk to someone, anything. Just don't leave me. Candy, I said, my voice cold but controlled, you didn't just cheat. You destroyed us. Counseling won't change what you did. I don't trust you, and I don't love you anymore. It's over. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I went upstairs, grabbed more clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items, and left without another word. Over the next few days, things got messy. True to Sarah's warning, Candy started reaching out to friends and family, painting herself as the victim. I started getting texts from mutual friends asking me what was going on. Some were supportive, but others were clearly trying to pry for gossip. My favorite was from her friend Melissa, who texted, "Hey Tim. Candy told me you're leaving her. She's devastated. I just wanted to say, you're being really unfair to her. Everyone makes mistakes." I didn't respond to Melissa. Instead, I focused on the people who mattered, my family and a few close friends who knew me well enough to trust my side of the story. When I finally told my parents what was happening, my mom cried, and my dad swore under his breath. "Son," he said, gripping my shoulder, "you did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Candy's behavior escalated over the next week. She went from apologetic to combative, accusing me of being cold, heartless, and unwilling to fight for our marriage. She even tried guilt-tripping me with memories of our early years together. "Remember when we used to stay up all night talking about our dreams?" she texted one night. "That meant nothing to you." It stung to read those words because once upon a time, they were true. But that version of us was long gone, and it was her actions that had killed it. The final straw came when she showed up at my office unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant knocked on the door, looking uneasy. "Your wife is here," she said quietly. "She's, insisting on seeing you." My co-workers exchanged awkward glances as I excused myself and went to the lobby. Candy was standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. "Tim, we need to talk," she said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone around us. "This isn't the time or place," I said through gritted teeth. "Go home, Candy." "No," she shouted. "You're not going to ignore me. We're married, for God's sake." I felt every pair of eyes on us, the embarrassment crawling up my neck. "Candy," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, "leave now, or I'll call security." She stared at me, stunned, then stormed out, muttering something about how I was ruining her life. I went back to my meeting, but my focus was shot. Everyone pretended not to notice, but I knew the gossip would spread. That night, I called Sarah and told her everything. "She's losing it," I said. "Showing up at my work, trying to turn people against me. What's next?" "Stay calm," she advised. "This is a tactic. She's trying to provoke you, hoping you'll react emotionally. Don't give her that power. Just stick to the plan." And that's exactly what I intended to do. Candy could cry, yell, and scheme all she wanted. I was done. The only thing left was to see this through to the end. The day after Candy's office stunt, I started getting calls from her family. Her sister, Beth, was the first. "Tim, what's going on?" she asked. "Candy told me you're being unreasonable. Can't you just forgive her? Did she tell you why I'm leaving?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Not exactly. She cheated. Multiple times. With her boss and others," I said bluntly. Beth gasped, stammering something about needing to talk to Candy. I ended the call, tired of defending myself. That night, Candy texted, "Why are you turning my family against me?" I didn't reply. Letting her dig her own grave felt better. At work, whispers followed me after her dramatic visit. A coworker stopped me in the break room. "Everything okay at home?" he asked. "Getting there," I replied, keeping it vague. The pitying look he gave me was humiliating, but I let it slide. Candy had already made herself the villain. I didn't need to do more. I reminded myself, stay calm. Stay focused. Next move, finalizing the paperwork. 2 days later, I met Sarah to finalize the divorce paperwork. She reviewed everything carefully, nodding as I explained Candy's escalating behavior. "She's emotional right now," Sarah said. "Expect her to fight, especially over finances. But with the evidence we have, you're in a strong position." I signed the documents, feeling a mix of relief and dread. "How long will it take?" I asked. "Depends," she said. "If she contests, it could drag out. If she's smart, she'll settle quickly." That evening, I dropped the papers off at Candy's house. She opened the door, saw the envelope, and froze. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Divorce papers," I said plainly. "It's time to make this official." Her expression shifted from shock to anger. You're really doing this? I have to, I said, stepping back. Goodbye, Candy. I turned and walked away, her shouts echoing behind me. The process had begun. There was no turning back. The day after serving the papers, the storm began. Candy called and texted non-stop, alternating between begging and lashing out. One text read, "I can't believe you're throwing us away." Another, "You're the one ruining this marriage, not me." I blocked her number and forwarded everything to Sarah. "Let her lawyer contact me," I told her. By the weekend, Candy's antics escalated. Mutual friends started calling. "Candy says you're overreacting," one friend said. "She made a mistake, but divorce? Isn't that extreme?" "She didn't just make a mistake," I replied. "She destroyed our marriage." "I'm done explaining myself." The friend fell silent, clearly uncomfortable. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stand firm. That night, I stayed with a close friend, Matt. Over beers, I vented about everything. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "you're handling this better than I would. Just keep moving forward. You deserve better." Hearing that helped more than I expected. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Small steps, but progressed. A few days later, Sarah called me with updates. Candy had lawyered up. "She's contesting," Sarah said. "She's claiming you neglected the marriage, and that's why she strayed. She's also asking for alimony." I felt a flash of anger. Alimony? After what she did? "Unfortunately, infidelity doesn't always negate spousal support," Sarah said. "But with her earning a solid income, we can argue against it." Stay calm. Later, Candy emailed me directly. "Tim, you're being unfair. You weren't there for me emotionally, and I made a mistake because of it. We both need to own our part in this." I forwarded the email to Sarah, shaking my head. Mistake doesn't cover a pattern of betrayal, I thought. That night, I received a call from Jake's wife, Diane. "I heard about what's happening," she said. "I'm sorry for what Candy and Jake did." Her voice cracked as she added, "I'm filing for divorce too. They deserve each other." Hearing her pain mirrored mine, but it also reassured me I wasn't alone in this mess. Candy's attempts to rewrite the narrative only strengthened my resolve. Over the next week, more mutual friends started reaching out. Some were genuinely supportive, but others clearly sided with Candy. One couple, Tom and Sarah, invited me to lunch. "We just want to understand," Sarah said carefully. "Candy says she made a mistake, but feels like you've shut her out completely." I leaned back in my chair, trying to stay composed. "She didn't make one mistake," I said. "She made a series of choices that destroyed our marriage. I'm not shutting her out, I'm protecting myself." Tom nodded, but Sarah still looked hesitant. "Do you think there's any chance of reconciliation?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "That ship has sailed." After that conversation, I noticed a shift in my social circle. Some friends stopped reaching out entirely. Others made it clear they supported me. Matt, my closest friend, summed it up best. "Anyone who sides with Candy after what she did isn't worth your time, man. You're better off without them." He was right. The people who mattered were still by my side. The rest? They weren't my problem. It felt like another step toward closure. A few days later, Candy escalated again. She showed up at my motel unannounced, pounding on the door. "Tim, please let me in," she shouted. "We need to talk." I opened the door just enough to block her from barging in. "What do you want, Candy?" I asked coldly. Tears streamed down her face. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you, Tim. I can't live without you." I sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "You didn't just hurt me, Candy. You humiliated me. And now you're trying to rewrite the story like I'm the villain. It's too late." Her desperation turned to anger. "So that's it? 12 years down the drain because you can't forgive me." "You threw away those 12 years, I said sharply. "Not me." She stood there, glaring at me, before finally storming off. I watched her leave, my chest heavy, but my resolve intact. That night, Sarah called with an update. Candy had sent a counterproposal through her lawyer. She was asking for a larger share of the house and a lump sum payment. "She's grasping at straws," Sarah said. "We'll push back hard." "Don't worry." Candy's desperation wasn't just emotional, it was tactical. But I was ready. The next week brought a surprising shift. Candy's lawyer reached out to Sarah, signaling they were open to mediation. She might be realizing she's in a weaker position than she thought, Sarah explained. This could save you time and money. We scheduled the mediation for later that week. I spent the days leading up to it preparing myself emotionally. Candy might cry, yell, or play the victim, but I had to stay composed. The day of the mediation, I walked into the conference room to find Candy already seated. She looked worn out, a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. The mediator started with pleasantries, but Candy cut straight to the point. "Tim, I just want this to be over," she said quietly. Her tone surprised me, no dramatics, just exhaustion. For the first time, I wondered if she truly understood the gravity of what she'd done. The discussions were tense but productive. Candy's initial demands were scaled back significantly, and we eventually reached an agreement. I'd keep the house, and she'd receive a smaller settlement than she'd originally asked for. By the end of the day, I felt a strange sense of relief. The hardest part was behind me. When we left, Candy pulled me aside. "I'm sorry for everything," she said, tears in her eyes. I nodded, but I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late. I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Closure was finally within reach. The mediation marked a shift, but the emotional fallout was far from over. Even with an agreement in place, I found myself replaying everything, our happy moments, the red flags I missed, and the gut-wrenching betrayal. It was like watching a movie of my life with someone else at the controls, skipping to the worst parts. A few days after the mediation, I went back to the house to sort through our shared belongings. Candy wasn't home, and I was grateful for the solitude. As I walked through the rooms, memories hit me like waves. The photos on the walls, the souvenirs from vacations, even the little sticky notes we used to leave each other, it all felt like pieces of a life that no longer existed. In our bedroom, I found a box of keepsakes Candy had stashed away. Inside were ticket stubs from our first concert together, letters we'd written each other, and even the napkin from the restaurant where I'd proposed. I sat on the floor, holding that napkin, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and longing. How did we go from being so in love to this? I almost left the box there, but then I stopped myself. This was my closure, my goodbye to the life we had. I carried the box outside and threw it in the trash. That night, I met up with Matt at a bar. "You look like you've been through the ringer," he said, handing me a beer. "I have," I admitted. "It's weird. The divorce isn't even final yet, but I feel like I've already lost her." Matt nodded. "You didn't lose her, man. She lost you. You're just figuring out how to move forward now." We talked for hours, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe. Matt didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix things, he just listened. Sometimes, that's all you need. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely motivated. I decided to make a list of things I wanted to do, things that had nothing to do with Candy or the life we'd built together. Join a gym. Take a solo trip somewhere new. Pick up an old hobby, maybe photography or hiking. Reconnect with friends I'd lost touch with. Focus on work and see where it takes me. It wasn't a grand plan, but it was a start. A week later, Candy called. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Tim," she said softly, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" I asked, confused. "For not dragging this out. For being better about this than I deserve," she said. Her voice cracked. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I hope someday you can forgive me." There was a long pause before I responded. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Candy. But I can move on. That's the best I can do." She started crying, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I felt done. That night, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was crisp, and the stars were out, a rare sight in the city. As I walked, I realized something. I wasn't walking away from my life. I was walking towards something new, something better. Closure isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting that some chapters end, even if you didn't want them to. And that's okay. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself smile. The final paperwork came through 3 weeks later. Sarah called to let me know the divorce was officially finalized. "It's done, Tim," she said. "Congratulations." Or I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. "It works," I said, smiling faintly. "Thanks for everything." Hanging up, I sat in my car for a moment, letting the reality sink in. The The marriage was over. The betrayal, the pain, the anger, it was all part of the past now. And while I wouldn't say I felt happy, I felt free. That weekend, I started making changes. The house was legally mine, but I didn't want to stay surrounded by memories of what I'd lost. I reached out to a realtor to start the process of selling it. While sorting through the last of my things, I came across an old photo of Candy and me on our honeymoon. We looked so young, so full of hope. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in a box marked Donate. Some memories aren't worth holding on to. To celebrate the fresh start, I booked a trip to Colorado. I'd always wanted to hike the Rockies, but never found the time. Now, there were no excuses. Standing on a trail overlooking miles of untouched wilderness, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos, all of it felt smaller here, insignificant against the vastness of nature. Back home, I started living for myself. I joined the gym, reconnected with old friends, and even signed up for a photography class. For the first time in years, I wasn't focused on keeping someone else happy. I was focused on me. One evening, I was at a local coffee shop editing photos when a woman sat down at the table next to mine. She had a book in one hand and a latte in the other, her face lit by the golden glow of the sunset streaming through the windows. We exchanged a polite smile, and I went back to my laptop. But a few minutes later, she glanced over. "Those are beautiful," she said, nodding toward my screen. "Thanks," I said, surprised. "I'm just starting out, really." "Well, you've got a good eye," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Mia, by the way." "Tim," I said, shaking her hand. We ended up talking for nearly an hour, about photography, books, and the best coffee spots in town. When I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Looking back, the journey was messy, painful, and far from what I imagined my life would be. But it taught me something important. Sometimes, endings aren't the worst thing. They're just the beginning of something new. Candy's betrayal shattered me, but it also forced me to rebuild. And in rebuilding, I found someone I hadn't seen in years: myself. As I walked out of that coffee shop, I realized I wasn't just moving on from the past. I was stepping into the future, one I'd create on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what came next.